production should be more carefully monitored. Hi, I'm Madison Bushlover.
I'm Samuel Michael.
I'm Talay Jones.
And I'm Praniti Kujar.
One of the more controversial topics in the world today are genetically modified organisms, specifically their effects on human and the environment. Although some do blindly believe that genetically modified organisms are just as healthy as their organic counterparts, genetically modified organisms have not been extensively researched and therefore may cause unanticipated and dangerous results. Genetically modified organisms are unhealthy for consumers, therefore their production and consumption should be more carefully monitored, as they can cause severe toxicity and high allergicity in humans, creating pesticide resistance in weeds, and they are produced through unethical means. While some argue that genetically modified organism production and consumption monitoring through labeling may cause a variety of economic issues, such as increased prices for consumers and loss of business for biotech companies, both locally and globally, these potential losses far outweigh the detrimental impacts of genetically modified organisms upon humans and the environment. Environmental impacts. Genetically modified organisms have detrimental effects upon the environment and our Earth that far outweigh possible benefits that may be reaped from these unnatural organisms. Some devastating effects of GMOs are the creation of herbicide-resistant superweeds that choke out native plant species, the future threat of loss of biodiversity in the environment through the cross-pollination of seeds, and the degrading impact that genetically modified species have upon the environment. Superweeds are the result of the crossbreeding of weeds with genetically modified organisms in the environment. Once these pests crossbred with GMOs, they can easily inherit some of their beneficial traits, such as the ability to survive and flourish in harsh terrains, their fast-growing and therefore rapidly spreading properties, and their herbicide-resistant properties. As the image shows, Monsanto is choking out Mother Nature. Genetically modified organisms have devastating effects upon the ecosystems they are placed within, such as degrading and stripping the soil of its nutrients, releasing and containing dangerous chemicals that harm native plants and animal species, and threatening the biodiversity environment. Through the production of GMOs, biotech companies put large farms out of business, taking over the agricultural market, and they are contaminating once organic crops.
GMOs also increase toxicity in crops, which causes severe allergic reactions in humans. GMOs are created when crops are introduced to new genes from other organisms, and these create advantageous traits in the crops. And the new genes can originate from sources that have not been intended for human use. For example, the Starlink company created a breed of corn that uses a type of gene that was not intended for human use, and this corn is also for horses to eat, not for humans. However, the genes that are injected into the crops can contaminate other crops around them that are intended for human use. For example, the Starlink corn contaminated other corn that was meant for human use, which actually went into taco shells from Taco Bell. And one woman in California actually ate 3 of these tacos, and she went into anaphylactic shock. And these are some forms of severe allergic reactions. So this is a very common side effect of GMOs. As you can see in this chart, according to the CDC, there's been a 265% increase in the rate of hospitalizations related to food allergic reactions since the introduction of GMOs. GMOs also are very unethical because large GMO companies always tend to bring down lawsuits on small farmers regarding the GMO seeds because they accuse the small farmers of illegally planting these seeds. However, the small farmers are usually victims of accidental cross-pollination or contamination, just like the last slide. The large GMO companies such as Monsanto usually know that this is the case, but they still misuse their power to earn more money. And this bullying is so commonly acknowledged as unethical that federal appeals courts have forced Monsanto to make a binding promise not to do this anymore without full evidence. Also, they are unethical because poor farmers buy the GMO seeds thinking that they are helpful because they're pesticide resistant and they'll help them save more money. However, they become addicted to these new seeds and they're forced to buy expensive amounts of them because the GMO companies keep raising their prices. which is how the GMO companies keep getting more money from poor farmers, which is a very unethical practice.
There are many economic issues with the GMOs, for example, labeling costs. Washington Post wrote an article about William Lester of Cornell University, who said that a study he conducted said a New York family of 4 will pay $500 a year for GMO labeling, whereas other studies contradicted him and said that they would only pay $2.30 a year. For effective labeling, one needs to segregate the GMOs by traits and genes along the line of production. So, a Maine farmer said that a grain bin costs $2 a bushel to buy and install, and therefore to buy and install large amounts of bushels of grain bins along the entire line of production would cause a lot of money to be spent into segregating GMOs. For global impacts, there was an article done by UC Berkeley Stacy Fens, who wrote about the Professor David Silverman, who said that genes make some crops drought resistant but are not being used due to pressure from an anti-GMO lobby. For resistance, Elizabeth Roy, a modern farmer, did an article about Chris Edgeridge, who said that 5 years ago the traits worked. Now the weeds are adjusting, the worms are adjusting, the weeds are resistant, and Mother Nature adapts. And there was some hype a while back about the golden rice that Times Magazine talked about, which supposedly was able to produce beta carotene, which naturally turned into vitamin A in humans. But there are problems, as Robbins, who wrote an article about that, said. Golden rice will not grow in the kinds of soil that it needs to be of value to the world's hungry. It requires large amounts of fertilizers and pesticides, and it will not grow and it requires large amounts of water. And because of this, biotech companies still spent millions of dollars in advertising the golden rice, even though it didn't work.
Over the period of 20 years, millions of pesticides have been added in our air as a result of unrestricted production of genetically modified crops. And so for this reason, the government needs to establish regulations that enforce companies to label their products as genetically modified, and also they need to reduce the amount of genetically monitored crops that are put into our environment. The potential long-term risks from eating genetically engineered food are known, and the FDA contends that there is not sufficient scientific evidence. The potential cumulative long-term risks have not been studied. By a show of hands, how many of you would like to be aware if the food you were eating contained genetically modified ingredients? Okay. 80% of processed foods do contain genetically modified ingredients. However, Americans unknowingly eat these foods because the government has not established regulations that enforce companies to label their products as so. And statistics support the fact that Americans would like to know if their foods have been genetically modified. A Consumers Union poll found that 95% of U.S. consumers approve of mandatory labeling of genetically engineered milk and meat products. So solutions to this problem would be for the government to label their product, for the government to make companies label their products as genetically modified, and to reduce the amount of crops that are genetically modified because they do add pesticides in the air.
In conclusion, genetically modified foods should not be produced or monitored, but if they are to be, then they should be labeled because they cause severe toxic allergies in humans. They increase pesticide resistance in the bugs and weeds, and their production is very unethical. While some believe that GMOs are nutritious and even more environmentally friendly than the organic plants that we grow, they actually have many unexpected side effects that make them potentially dangerous and should not be produced and consumed, therefore.
Anyone on your team can answer, what information did you need before you began your research, and how did that information shape your research?
We kind of needed to have a general basis of what GMOs were and the different effects they could have, because there are some positives and some negatives of them. We chose the negative side because we could find more information on that.
Okay. How did you select the strategies you used to gather information or conduct a research, and were they effective?
Well, we use the lenses, the political lens, futuristic lens, like economic, ethical lens, and by using those lenses, we all created our individual research on the topic of genetically modified organisms.
Okay. If you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to this issue?
I feel like we would add more statistics and more facts, and also more firsthand experiences for evidence.
What are the implications or consequences of your findings?
The consequences could be that the consequences were that there were many different biased issues that were going on, because it's hard to find stuff about GMOs because it's a modern debate topic that's unbiased, and there was many issues surrounding that, so it was hard to find unbiased material.
Can I add on to that?
Yes.
So some of the consequences that we did find of GMOs were that they're degrading the soil, they're harming other native plant species, they're contaminating organic plant species, and they could cause economic issues.
Thank you guys very much.